Welcome to our Managing Stress educational session brought to you by Healthy Decisions. My name is Kara Willett. I am the Healthy Decisions Coordinator, and I will be presenting this subject to you today. Let's start from the beginning. What is stress? Stress is your body's response to pressure when faced with challenging situations. Your body turns on this biological response when it responds to stressful stimuli. Chemicals and hormones are released that are meant to help your body to rise to the challenge. Your heart rate may increase, your brain works faster, you might have more focus, and you can experience a sudden burst of energy. This response is natural and basic. It's what kept our ancestors from falling victim to hungry predators. It's important to remember that stress is a subjective piece. Something that may be stressful to myself may not be stressful to you. For instance, a nurse who's experienced and working in the emergency room might not be as easily rattled by a trauma, whereas a person who has never experienced such a sight would have significant stress when experiencing that. An important question to consider when we're looking at our stress index: is all stress bad? Remember, the definition of stress is a normal psychological and physical reaction to the ever-increasing demands and changes of life. Therefore, not all changes are bad and not all stress is going to be bad. It's important to consider all the changes and demands going on in your life when you're feeling stressed. Some positive stressors to consider would be changing jobs, buying a new house, having a baby, getting married. All of these components of a person's life are generally considered positive. However, they each carry a great deal of stress with them when those instances are occurring for a person. When we're considering how stressed we are on a regular basis, we often only look at the bad stress as the primary source. It's important to look at all stress and all changes when you're considering the amount of stress that you are dealing with. Let's take a peek at this life stress inventory as an example. This life stress inventory is still used by many practitioners today. It was created in the late 60s by two psychiatrists with the idea that examining the medical records of medical patients is a way to determine whether stressful events might cause illnesses. So as you look at this inventory, you can see at the very top of the list what we would expect. Some of the higher ranking life events that cause a significant amount of stress: death of a spouse, number one. Number two is divorce. But as we start to look down this page, very shortly after these negative pieces, you see positive ones. Number 7 is marriage. Number 10 is retirement. And number 12 is pregnancy. All generally considered positive pieces of a person's life, things that we celebrate. Yet, when we are looking at our overall picture of our stress load, we tend to not include these types of events. So yet another reason, looking back, to consider all change going on in your life when you're trying to figure out where your stress is coming from. There are two types of stress to consider: acute and chronic. Acute stress is your body's immediate reaction to a new challenging event or demand. And people also know this as the fight or flight response. You may experience a response to cope with the pressures of maybe a near-miss automobile accident, an argument with a family member, a mistake you made at work. But on the flip side, acute stress isn't always caused by negative stress. It can also be the experience that you have when you're riding a roller coaster or having a person jump out at you when you're in a haunted house. Isolated episodes of acute stress should not have any lingering health effects. In fact, they actually can be quite healthy for you. Stressful situations give your body and brain practice to developing the best response for future stressful situations. Now, when we look at chronic stress can be detrimental to your health. It can contribute to several serious diseases or health risks. And chronic stress is when acute stress isn't resolved and it begins to increase or last for long periods of time. So severe acute stress, such as stress suffered as a victim of a crime or a life-threatening situation, when it's not resolved, can lead to a host of situations like mental health problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, or acute stress disorder. So when we're looking at these two situations, the chronic stress is what we're really wanting to prevent by dealing with our acute stress, or learn how to cope with better if we cannot make the chronic stress go away. So how can stress affect your health? The body's nervous system often does a poor job of distinguishing between daily stressors and life-threatening events. If you're stressed over an argument with a friend, a traffic jam on your commute to work, or a mountain of bills, for example, your body can still react as if you're facing a life or death situation. When you repeatedly experience the fight or flight response in your daily life, it can lead to numerous health problems, some of which you see listed here. A raise in blood pressure that doesn't get resolved, a suppressed immune system, an increased risk of heart attack and stroke, speed up in the aging process, sleep problems, which could either be oversleeping or not being able to sleep, and they leave you vulnerable to a host of mental and emotional problems as well. So knowing that we are going to have stress in our lives, regardless of how many changes we make, we need to look at what can we do about the stress? How are we going to better manage this to avoid some of the problems that we just talked about on the last slide? We're going to take a little stress inventory now. Go ahead and find something to write on, something to write with, a way that you can record the answers to these questions. And when I ask these questions, I want you to consider the last 24 hours of your life before you answer them. Here are the 5 questions. What were my energy levels like throughout the day? How did I feel emotionally? How did I handle other people today? How did I deal with any unexpected changes to my day? Have I taken time today just for myself? Go ahead and pause this presentation. Take the time to answer these questions. And then go ahead and come back when you are done. Now that you've completed your stress inventory, I want you to take a look at those answers. Were the answers what you wanted to hear? Is that the way that you want to be able to handle people? Do you feel like you're doing a good job with all the challenges that are coming at you on a regular basis? To really identify your true source of stress, you need to look closely at your habits, the attitudes that come out of you during your day, and maybe some of the things that are reactive with you. And so it's always good to do a little inventory. As we've discussed stress and how it can affect us, the question now becomes, what are we going to do about it? The first thing you need to do is to make sure that it's going to be a priority. Make the solid decision. As you would with any other change in your life, you certainly wouldn't say, I'm going to lose 20 pounds by August 31st, and then never put a plan in place. No method, no way to get there, no specific plan of how that's going to happen. If that were to be the way in which you dealt with making a change in your life, your success rate would be fairly low. The same thing needs to occur if you're going to make some changes to how you're managing stress. So when you decide, I need to do something about my stress level, or I want to make some changes to how stress is affecting me, you need to make a plan, just like you would with anything else. So the first thing you're going to do in your plan, you're going to start monitoring your stress level. You don't know where you're starting from unless you start keeping track of it. Identify what your own personal triggers are. As we talked about at the beginning, triggers are going to be different for everybody, as stress is quite subjective. So you're going to need to learn, what are my major triggers that will really make my stress level go higher. And then you need to start thinking about strategies and have strategies ready for dealing with your triggers when they occur, or an increase in stress when it occurs. So what are some symptoms that may help you to identify a high level of stress? There are 4 areas we're going to take a peek at: behavioral symptoms, emotional symptoms, physical symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. So as we look at these 4 categories, there are certain pieces that if they should be occurring either with each other or just on a high level, they should be red flags to pull you in and make you start paying more attention to the stress that you're dealing with. When you look at behavioral symptoms, some of the things that we currently see is a change in eating habits, eating more, eating less, sleeping too much, sleeping too little, isolating yourself from others. How often do you get to the end of your work week and you say, oh, I want to stay home. I don't want to have to deal with anybody. I just want to zone out and not have to deal with anything. That is a way of managing the bombardment that you have had during the course of your work week sometimes. Procrastinating or neglecting your responsibilities and using anything to relax that is alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, anything along those lines. When we look at emotional symptoms, some of the things that you may see creeping up when stress levels get high is a change in or an increase in moodiness and irritability, and your temper may be a bit shorter. Agitation may start coming out and you really have a difficult time relaxing. Feeling overwhelmed certainly is very common when people get very stressed, and a sense of loneliness and isolation as if you're the only person that is dealing with this amount of pressure. And depression can be a very common side effect from dealing with a great deal of stress. Physical symptoms are actually not always viewed as red flags, but it's important to start paying attention to aches and pains that are going on with you, and maybe changes in your digestive system, diarrhea, constipation, just constant issues with your stomach, nausea, dizziness, maybe some chest pain or rapid heartbeat, loss of sex drive, and of course frequent colds is usually a red flag as well. And lastly, when you look at cognitive possibilities, increased stress levels or high stress levels can contribute to memory problems or the inability to really concentrate on things. You may see an increase in poor judgment on your own part and seeing only the negative, having a really difficult time seeing the positive side of things. Anxiousness or racing thoughts and constant worrying are quite common to also see with high stress levels. So these are all red flags you want to be looking out for. Certainly, we all have things that we do when we get stressed. Some of them you see here: smoking, going out for drinks, binging on junk food or comfort food. Very common to zone out in front of the TV as a way of escaping. I mean, a lot of the things on this list are very common reactions to stress. Oftentimes, that's precisely the word to use, reaction. So we're not necessarily thinking out why we're doing this behavior, but if we were to start taking a step back and looking at why we are sleeping so little, we may discover it is a reaction to the stress that we are going through. So as we look at this list of coping mechanisms that many of us are currently doing, none of them are necessarily beneficial to us. And so we want to start replacing some of these with more positive ways of coping. This list of coping strategies is more what we're aiming for as a healthier way of dealing with stress that's coming at you. So at the beginning of this, we discussed being able to identify your stress. And the very first thing you listed here is to journal. I often get a cringed reaction from people when I say journal because it sounds like a lot of work. But you don't necessarily have to have a designated notebook and pen that you tote around in your pocket all the time. The idea behind this stress journal is really to just do it for a short period of time to really know where your starting point is. You could use a voice recording on your smartphone. You could just use a scrap piece of paper that you then throw out afterwards. But the idea behind it is to think out loud and start paying attention to what your habits are so that you know where you're starting from. So when you do this journal piece, you want to ask yourself these 4 questions. What has caused your stress? And if you're unsure, the answer, making a guess, is just as good as knowing the answer. How did it make you feel physically, and how did it make you feel emotionally? How did you act in response, or how did you react to this situation? And what did you do to make yourself feel better, if you did anything to make yourself feel better? These 4 simple questions are really going to help you to decipher, number 1, what are your triggers? And number 2, what are your typical reactions? And do you want to change those? And as you look down this list of coping strategies, there's some great tips, albeit easier said than done, many of them. For instance, learning how to say no. This is a huge lesson in learning how to set boundaries. And it's part of the idea of self-care and self-preservation in being able to decipher when enough is enough for you in particular. Learning to not try and control things that you are unable to control. Setting aside time for yourself on a regular basis. And you'll notice almost at the bottom of the sheet, it says, do something you enjoy, with the key 2 words after it, every day. The biggest lesson when it comes to stress management is learning whether or not you have a self-care routine. And if you don't, creating one. And what does that look like for you in particular? So your take-home message from today's PowerPoint is to start monitoring your stress levels. Learn what your stress triggers are. And have coping strategies ready so that when the stress pops up or when the triggers occur, you are prepared to deal with them in a different fashion than you have in the past. I thank you for participating in our Managing Stress PowerPoint. If you are a Healthy Decisions participant, please be sure to complete your quiz and submit that so that you may get credit for attending this session. Thank you so much.